everyone. Yes, sirree, it is Kenneth the K-Rock Cline with another episode of Crocking, Locking, and Dropping. And folks, oh boy, we have got a great one. I'll tell you what, I'm coming off watching probably one of the most intense Stanley Cup Final games I've ever seen in a while. Florida, Edmonton, Game 7, going down to the wire. But in the end, Florida, of course, won the Stanley Cup Finals. Congratulations to them. We'll talk more about them on this podcast. As a matter of fact, our episode is basically going to be a little bit more against basketball, against football, baseball, against any other sport whatsoever. But, folks, we got some good things to talk about today. We're going to be talking about the Stanley Cup Finals. We're going to be giving a little bit of a recap on where this finals ranks amongst the all-time classics. And was it fair to give Connor McDavid the Conn Smythe Trophy Award for MVP of the whole thing, even though he was on the losing team? We'll give my thoughts on that matter in just a few moments. And then, folks, we are approaching the next month of the Olympic Games. Well, next month is going to be the start of the Olympic Games, and we should be very excited as we see our nation's best athletes go up against the world's best athletes in different categories, going up to Paris, France. And I figured, what better way to pay homage to the Olympic Games by giving out my top 5 Olympic movies of all time. Yes, I'm giving out my top 5, even though normally I give out my top 5s on Mark T. Robinson and my other podcast, Two Pals on a Pod, which, man, Mark, you got to get your computer fixed. You got to get everything fixed. We're losing some traction there, and I'm just trying to build up my solo career. Come on now. You got to get going, man. We got to get back together, but don't worry, folks. We'll have that out real shortly, but this is a new podcast, or actually this has been a podcast that's been going on for some time. Crocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock. You can listen to this podcast on Podbean, Spotify, and I will post this podcast on my YouTube channel at KWCLINE91. Now, folks, before we get into this show, I want to tell you a little something that's really interesting that I saw. So, as we all know, the Boston Celtics won the NBA Finals, and the Florida Panthers just recently won the Stanley Cup Finals. And I thought that was really unique to see those two teams win their championships, even though Boston's won their 18th championship, while Florida had just won their first Stanley Cup Final. But then I came across this picture, and believe it or not, there is a Boston Celtics player and a Florida Panthers player that actually grew up as friends, and they both went to the same high school. I'm talking, of course, about Jason Tatum and Matthew Tkachuk. Tatum, who is the star point guard for the Boston Celtics, while Tkachuk, who is one of the star players for the Florida Panthers, they actually both went to the same school. And there was a picture of them riding a school bus, sitting next to each other together, and just kind of, you know how it is, high school friends, just say, hey, get into the picture, smile, and, you know, they both take a picture. They're on the school bus together. They look so young in this picture, man. Talk about youth and how much they've grown. But yes, they both went to the same high school, Chaminade Prep School, located in the suburbs of St. Louis, Missouri. And they actually, just were friends. Reading this article here from SB Nation, they were longtime friends going back to their days at Chaminade Prep School in the suburbs of St. Louis. Tatum, who was a promising basketball player, befriended Tkachuk, who wanted to follow in his father's footsteps into the NHL. Matthew, of course, is the son of legendary Hockey Hall of Famer Keith Tkachuk. I think Keith Tkachuk is in the Hall of Fame. I need to double check on that. But the two would spend time together, pushing each other, even making goofy videos together, as this assignment Tatum made for school stars Tkachuk briefly. And there is a YouTube video about Jason Tatum, who I guess during a class assignment was being interviewed and giving out his reasons why he loves going to school. And he briefly mentions Matthew Tkachuk in the video as well. So it's really nice to see those kids having a good time, and both of them winning their first championship in the same year. That is remarkable. And it just gets me to thinking, man, how come I was never an athlete, and how come I never had a friend that would be as successful? I want to say in my high school, our most successful athlete was Corey Whitsitt. Now, Corey was a golfer who competed in the U.S. Amateurs ranks, and he actually won the U.S. Amateur tournament one time, and that was the same tournament, or he was like I want to say he was 17 or 18. He won it at such a young age, and he was one of 4 golfers at the time to win that award. One of them, of course, being the great Tiger Woods. And I thought, man, that's really cool. And I really was hoping that Corey would continue to go on with a professional golf career and win a Masters jacket, maybe win the British Open or a U.S. Open, be a Grand Slam champion, But it just hasn't quite worked out the way I had hoped. But hey, Corey, you are still a great guy, great athlete. I wish you all the best, man. I hope you're having a good time, enjoying your life as well. And speaking of enjoying things, we are going to be coming right back where I give out my thoughts on the Stanley Cup Finals. So how do we rank it? Well, we'll find out when we come back. Last night, as of this podcast, I was watching Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals between the Florida Panthers and the Edmonton Oilers. And to tell you the truth, I did not think that this series would go 7 games, at least after the first 3 games. Now, I knew, beginning at the start of the season or the finals, even though I wasn't paying too much attention throughout the regular season, I knew that these were 2 great teams going into the Stanley Cup Finals. I knew that the Panthers had been there the year before and they lost to the Vegas Golden Knights, which unfortunately was a really devastating moment for them. But they got back to the Stanley Cup Finals and they deserved it. I mean, the playoff run that they went through, they had to go through Tampa Bay in 5 games. They defeat Boston in 6, and then they went on to take down the team with the best record in the Stanley Cup or playoffs all season long, the New York Rangers. They won in 6 games and definitely showed why they were a true team worthy of getting back all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals and looking for redemption after last year. Well, they're taking on the Edmonton Oilers. And Edmonton was playing, looking for their first championship since 1990, which was their last championship. And they had a lot going for them. Because not only was Edmonton looking for their first championship since 1990, but they were looking to become the first Canadian team in the NHL to win the Stanley Cup Finals since 1993. And I'll tell you what, 1993, the last time a Canadian team won, that was when the Montreal Canadiens won their 24th and last Stanley Cup Finals, which included them winning a remarkable 10 overtime games in a row just for them to win the championship. But since then, the 94 Canucks, the 2006 Oilers, the 2007 Senators, the 2011 Canucks, and the 2021 Montreal Canadiens. All of those teams had an opportunity to win themselves a Stanley Cup, and all of them have failed. So Edmonton went into this series looking to make history and break the Canadian title jinx. Because Canada is hockey's game, no matter how you look at it. Yes, American teams are dominating, but the reason why they're dominating is because most of their players are from Canada. And they have international players from Finland, Sweden, Russia, wherever, you name it. I mean, just thinking about all the teams that have played in this game, and even they have Americans too, as well. So, but the Canadian or the Oilers were looking to break the jinx. They have arguably the best player in the game right now in Connor McDavid, and we'll talk with him, talk about him, not talk with him. Can you imagine if I actually got an interview with Connor McDavid just days after or hours after he lost the Stanley Cup Finals? Man, you would be the greatest podcaster in the world, K-Rock, and this is only your 19th episode. Whatever you do for the rest of your time on this podcast, you forget about it, because this is the ultimate podcast if you were to get Connor McDavid on the show. But no, I don't have Connor McDavid on the show, unfortunately, and even if I wanted to, I'm not sure if he would be willing to talk about it since, well, he's kind of going through a bit of a down period at this moment after a tough 7-game series loss. But anyway, we'll talk more about him in just a bit, but right now I want to talk about the series in general. And you go into the first game, The Florida Panthers. I almost start saying Carolina Panthers because Florida and Carolina, they're sort of in the same area almost. But the Florida Panthers, they win the first game 3-0, and it was a dominant performance pretty much throughout. They shut out the Oilers 3-0. You know, you had goals from Alexander Barkov, who scored twice, or actually he got 2 assists in that game. 3 different Panthers scored, and just an outstanding game from Sergei Bobrovsky, who managed to save all 32 shots from Edmonton on goal, and that resulted in a Game 1 victory. So Florida wins the first game. In Game 2, another dominant victory, though the Oilers did score the first goal in that game, but the Panthers responded with 2 goals in the second and then 2 more in the third to win 4-1. So Florida, through the first 2 games, outscored the Oilers 7-1, and the series is going back to Edmonton, and now you're thinking, okay, this is probably going to be a turning point because Edmonton is really good at home. You know, their fans are boisterous and they're loud, and they have some great passion, and it's hard to go 3-0 in any series, in any sport for that matter, because now you have to win at least 1 game on the road to give yourselves a great chance to win. And sure enough, Florida finds himself tied at 1 in the second period, but then they take control. They score 3 goals in the second period and now lead 4-1. However, the Oilers, they start coming back. They start chipping away. They pick up 2 goals with about 7 minutes left to go in the game, and you're thinking, okay, the Oilers have some momentum. They're just 1 goal away from tying it, 1 goal away, and then we go into overtime, and then who knows from there. But Florida was able to hold off the Edmonton Oilers and take the second game, or to take the third game, by the final of 4-3. So now the Florida Panthers are in a very unique situation. They are up 3-0 and now have the luxury of having 4 chances to close out the series. Now, 3-0 in any sports series, that's pretty much almost all the time game over, series over, because it's just a matter of time before the team that's up 3-0 can close it out. Now, we've seen from time to time that all the times in sports history where a team has gone up 3-0 in a series, but was not able to close out the series. In baseball, the 2004 Red Sox overcame a 3-0 deficit to the New York Yankees. In hockey, the 1942 Toronto Maple Leafs overcame a 3-0 deficit to the Detroit Red Wings. Then, in 1975, you have the New York Islanders overcoming a 3-0 deficit to the Pittsburgh Penguins. And crazy enough, they almost did it again in the very next round when they were down 3-0 to the Philadelphia Flyers, only to win the next 3, and then the Flyers, of course, won Game 7. And speaking of the Flyers, they came back from 3-0 down against the Boston Bruins in 2010. And then the most recent case of this happening was when the Los Angeles Kings overcame a 3-0 deficit to the San Jose Sharks, and they went on to win the Stanley Cup Finals that year. So it has happened before, and certainly you're likely to see that happen in hockey more often than any other sport. But the hardest part is knowing that the end is coming. You got 4 chances. You're down 3-0. You have to win 3 games just to force a Game 7, and then you have to win Game 7 to complete the comeback. It could take a lot out of you. I mean, it really can. So going into Game 4, you think, okay, if this is the game, the Oilers know they need to win this game, and it's possible that maybe Florida doesn't play well and maybe they go back home. But, I mean, I know Florida would certainly want to win that game and, close out the show in Edmonton, because no team in NHL history had ever clinched the Stanley Cup Finals on the home ice of the Edmonton Oilers. And that wasn't going to happen in Game 4. The Oilers jump out to a 3-1 lead in the first period and then score 5 more goals in the next 2 to take Game 4 8-1. Okay, so not going to get a sweep, but that's okay. You're going back to Miami for a chance to close out the series in Game 5. So, no big deal, right? Well, Edmonton jumps out to a 3-1 lead, or 4-1 lead, in the second period. Florida is able to cut themselves down to 1 goal with about 4 minutes, or early in the third period. But Connor McDavid puts an empty netter in, and the Edmonton Oilers bring the series back to Edmonton for Game 6. So now the pressure is on Florida, because they have to win Game 6 in order to clinch the Stanley Cup Final. And once again, nobody has won a Stanley Cup on the home ice of Edmonton other than the Oilers themselves. And they don't do the job. Edmonton dominates Game 6, 5-1 the final. That brings us to the 7th and deciding game. And that's where what was expected to be a bit of a closeout series, a short series, has suddenly turned into this Game 7 where anything can happen. There were a lot of storylines going into Game 7. The Edmonton Oilers looking to become the first team since the 42 Maple Leafs to overcome a 3-0 deficit to win a Stanley Cup Finals. Also looking to break the Canadian title jinx that dates all the way back to 1993. And certainly for Connor McDavid, looking to etch himself as one of the best players in the history of the game with a Game 7 victory in the Stanley Cup Finals. You then had the Florida Panthers, who play in Miami. And at that time, Miami, aside from maybe Philadelphia, they were probably the most heartbroken city in all of the United States. Heartbroken sports city of all the United States, because they lost the NBA Finals in 2020. Then they lost it against the Denver Nuggets, and then they also lost it against the, they lost it against the Vegas Golden Knights last year. And the pressure is definitely on them. And certainly they don't want to hear the prospect of them blowing the series, because I'll tell you what, it's going to be with you for the rest of your life. If you lose 4 straight games in a Stanley Cup Final, it's going to be there, no matter what you try to do to redeem yourself. And that would have been very hard for Florida to come back from a situation like that. So you had a lot of that stuff happening. You also had Matthew Tkachuk, who I talked about earlier. His dad, Keith Tkachuk, was an NHL legend, and I double-checked on this, and he's not in the Hall of Fame, which I think is real sad, because I think he deserves to be in the Hockey Hall of Fame. But Matthew Tkachuk looking to win a Stanley Cup for his family and for his dad, because his dad played 18 years, never got a chance to lift the cup. Paul Maurice, the head coach for the Panthers, who has been around in the NHL for 36 years or so, he never won a Stanley Cup as a head coach. So there's a lot of pressure there. And going into that game, you had to be thinking, if you were Miami, man, this is Game 7, this is the ultimate, but it doesn't feel like that way for us. I mean, I'd be more nervous too for a Game 7 for sure. And I did pick Florida to win that Stanley Cup, but you just didn't know. You just felt like it was possible that the Oilers were going to come back and finish the job and win. So the first period commences, and Florida scores about 4.5 minutes into the game. Then, 2 minutes later, Edmonton scores, and it's 1-1. And you're thinking, oh boy, we're going to be in for a bit of a wild one here, because both teams are desperate to win desperately. And it's going to be a wild shootout, you think. It might be somewhere around the range of 6-5, 5-4, 6-4, or maybe 7-4, depending on how you see it in hockey. But things kind of settled down. Both goaltenders were able to play well, keep the game tied at the end of the first period. Then, with about under 5 minutes to go in the second period, Sam Reinhart scores the goal that puts him up 2-1, and Florida goes into the locker room up 2-1, 20 minutes away from the Stanley Cup Final. It's a one-goal game, but anything can happen. Edmonton can tie it. They can take the lead. They can go into overtime if they score. You just don't know what's going to happen in those 20 minutes. And watching that third period, it was intense. I was desperate. I was struggling to decide which team I wanted to root for. Oh, I wanted to root for Florida, or I wanted to root for Edmonton. I think I rooted for Edmonton first because I wanted to see them tie the game, and then I wanted to see them go into overtime in Game 7, which without question, would be the ultimate way to win a championship in any sport. Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals, sudden death overtime. I mean, that would be the ultimate way. I don't think we've had that in a long time, at least. It's definitely been a long time for sure. But I was rooting for Edmonton. And then, I want to say with about 3 minutes left, I started to kind of root for Florida because I really felt sympathized with them, having lost championship the year before, and, you know, having an opportunity to win. If they don't win, you're going to be labeled as a choker, and it would be the biggest heartbreak in franchise history. And it would be very sad if Florida doesn't hang on to win. Now, certainly you wouldn't mind seeing Edmonton score a goal to tie the game and go into overtime, but, man, Florida, you have an opportunity to do something to finish the job and also avoid the choke label. And sure enough, Florida was able to hold on to clinch the Stanley Cup Finals 2-1, the final score, and their fans went crazy. The players are celebrating, and you see the heartbreak of the Edmonton Oilers. I mean, it was just an unbelievable series. And, you know, I think anytime you have a 7-game series in hockey, a Stanley Cup Finals in hockey, it's going to be remembered as a classic for sure. But this series, in some ways, was a wild ride. It was a roller coaster. It was like an ultimate dream scenario. You're down 3-0 in a series, and then suddenly you win 3 straight just to force a Game 7. Everybody's now tuned in because whoever's going to win, what's it going to be? Is the team that falls behind 3-0 going to come back and finish the job and win? Or is the team that gave up 3 straight losses after winning the first 3 going to redeem themselves and win the Stanley Cup? I mean, that's the ultimate dream as well. And with hockey playoff series, it's really hard to decide because there wasn't any overtime periods in this game. We did have at least 1 or 2 games that could have gone to overtime, but they didn't. But I think from the overall perspective that based on the storyline, based on the dramatics and the 2 teams that were involved and as well as the players, I would probably argue that this was probably a top 5 Stanley Cup Finals of all time, at least in my lifetime. And I could come up with a list of some others that definitely deserve to be in the top 5. But for the time being, you know, I'm not going to do that because we got other things to talk about here. But it was definitely a great series between these 2 teams. And certainly, you know, hats off to both of them. They deserve it as well. Now, this is where things take an interesting turn. After the game, of course, you see the captain being presented with the Stanley Cup. He skates it around, and then he passes it on to his teammates, and then they give it to the coach. You know, everybody's celebrating this and that. But before that, they present the Conn Smythe Trophy. And this is given to the most valuable player of the entire playoffs. Not just the Stanley Cup Finals, but the most valuable player to be given this award throughout the entire playoffs, which that says a lot about the sport of hockey. So you're thinking, okay, who's going to be the Conn Smythe Trophy winner for the Panthers? You know, they had mentioned that Bobrovsky, the goaltender, was a candidate as well, but you wonder, were those last 3 games before Game 7 going to hurt his chances? You also think, okay, maybe the team captain for the Panthers, and then also maybe a guy like Reinhardt for that matter. You know, he had a goal here, and you just don't really know. So you're thinking, okay, they're going to give the award to maybe a Panthers player because in most sports leagues, they'll usually give it to a player on the winning team. Well, Commissioner Gary Bettman decides, or actually it was decided, that the most valuable player for the Stanley Cup Finals, or for the entire Stanley Cup playoffs, went to Connor McDavid. Connor McDavid, who was on the losing Edmonton Oilers. And that drew some mixed reactions. On one hand, without question, Connor McDavid was the best player in the entire Stanley Cup playoffs. He led the NHL in scoring and also broke Wayne Gretzky's record for most assists in a playoff run, which is a remarkable achievement. I mean, breaking records in the NHL is one thing, but breaking Wayne Gretzky's record I mean, it's not the all-time goals record or it's not the all-time points record. That might be broken sooner rather than later. It's without question a remarkable achievement to break a record held by the great one himself in Wayne Gretzky. And, I mean, Connor McDavid definitely was their offense. He was their go-to guy. He deserved to be the most valuable player. But then, here's the other side of the argument. He was on the losing team. And, fans are saying, well, he shouldn't have won it because he didn't win. Or he didn't even produce in games 6 and 7. Okay. As I said earlier, the Conn Smythe Trophy is the award that is given to the best player in the entire playoffs through all 4 rounds, not the Stanley Cup Finals. If there was such a thing as an MVP in the Stanley Cup Finals, he probably wouldn't have won it. He might have been a candidate for it, but he wouldn't have won it. But we're talking about the entire playoffs. Now, you can argue that if Barbowski did not have that 3-game stretch where he wasn't brilliant, then he would have been named the Stanley Cup Finals MVP in that sense. But again, it's about the playoffs. And no one was a better player in the Stanley Cup playoffs than Connor McDavid. So I don't understand it. I think fans are just, like in today's society, fans are so used to seeing players on winning teams win the award. Like, we talk about if we were going to the NBA back in 2015, when fans were saying, well, LeBron James should have won the MVP award instead of Andre Iguodala, even though the Warriors won the championship. And I don't disagree with him. I think LeBron James was the best player. But I think the NBA was trying hard not to go down the route of having a losing player win the MVP award, even though Jerry West, the first ever player to achieve this honor, was on the losing team. So I don't blame fans for thinking that way. I don't blame the NBA for thinking that way. But with hockey, it's different. Because hockey's a sport where anything can go. It can tip both ways. And, Connor McDavid definitely finished his postseason with 42 points, 8 goals, and 34 assists. The guy put up 42 points. And he didn't even score that many goals. He only scored 8, but he had 34 assists, which is remarkable performance. One of the best performances of all time. It's unfortunate that he didn't win the Stanley Cup Final, and he certainly would have liked to have won the Stanley Cup Finals himself, and maybe he'll get another opportunity in the near future. But fans were a little bit divided over this issue. But then the bigger issue is when the award was presented, he wasn't on the ice to accept it. And some people wonder, it's poor sportsmanship. He doesn't want to get out there and get embarrassed and be booed by the fans and this and that, or mocked because he didn't win the Stanley Cup Finals. Or other fans are saying, well, what's the point? Would you rather win the Conn Smythe Trophy or rather win the Stanley Cup Finals? I'm sure the answer would probably be, I'd rather win both. If the Oilers had won and the situation was still there, he would have accepted the trophy on the ice. But I guess he was disappointed that he couldn't get the job done. And I don't blame him for not being out there. I think he was upset. Now, certainly, there have been players before in the Conn Smythe, in the history of the Stanley Cup Finals, that have accepted the Conn Smythe Trophy, even though they were on the losing teams. Sebastian Jaguar in 2003, the last guy to win a Conn Smythe Trophy while playing for a losing team, went out and accepted the honor, even though he was booed by the New Jersey Devils fans. And the last guy to win this award while not being a goalie was Reggie Leach back in 1976. And remember, the Flyers were swept in that year. They were going for a three-peat, and they were swept by the Montreal Canadiens. So I don't necessarily blame Connor McDavid for, not being out there to accept the award. I mean, yes, fans were booing because they thought someone else should have won it. But look, Connor McDavid had the playoffs of his life, and he deserved it. So you can argue all you want, because at the end of the day, you had chances for somebody to win the award earlier, and it's your fault that you ended up going to a Game 7. And you were fortunate that you won Game 7, because it could have gone the other way. Now, I'm not being critical of the Panthers, because at the end of the day, there's no criticism needed for them. They redeemed themselves, they overcame adversity, and they deserve to win the Stanley Cup Finals. But at the end of the day, the Conn Smythe Trophy is given to the best player, and it's different in the National Hockey League than it is in the NBA or in Major League Baseball. in baseball, the only guy, Bobby Richardson in 1960 with the New York Yankees. Actually, yeah, in 1960 with the New York Yankees, even though the Pittsburgh Pirates won the World Series, that was a case where somebody won the MVP on a losing team. Chuck Hawley for the Dallas Cowboys, Super Bowl V, won the Super Bowl MVP, even though the Baltimore Colts won the championship that year. So you have to go figure that, without question, there's going to be some decisions like this. But I just don't think you can give it to anyone else in that stage. You might have had a couple of candidates, but I think at the end of the day, the NHL made the right decision, even if Panther fans aren't going to agree with it. But at the end of the day, Panther fans, you deserve to be happy. You deserve to win a championship. You should be celebrating the championship. This was a team game. Didn't matter if you didn't have an MVP or not. It would have been cool, but it's okay. At the end of the day, you won a championship, and that's all that matters. You know, it is what it is. I mean, certainly, if you were to ask me would I win a championship or would I rather win an MVP, and I can't choose either. If you ask me what I want, I'm taking the championship any day of the week. So, Panther fans, congratulations on an outstanding series. Same to you, Edmonton Oilers, and I think that there will be a championship team in Canada within the next couple of years. But we'll have to wait and see. And speaking of waiting to see, I got a top 5 list for y'all. It's my all-time favorite Olympic movies. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. As I said earlier, we are 1 month away from the start of the Summer Olympic Games, which this year will be held in Paris, France. And folks, I gotta tell you, I am looking forward towards seeing another great competition. I know my mom, who I'm going to give a shout out to her, she's a huge fan of the Olympic Games, or at least she wants to see some real good competition as well. So I'm excited for this year's upcoming Olympic Games in Paris, France. We'll see how many medals the Americans will win, gold, silver, or bronze. But you never know. There's some really great competition out there as well. But anyways, what I wanted to do for this time is I wanted to give out another top 5 list. And this time, I'm going to be counting down my top 5 favorite Olympic sports movies. Now, I'm going to admit I will be cheating a bit, and that's a word I kind of cringe every time I say, but I will be cheating a bit because even though this is going to be the Summer Olympic Games coming up, I do have 2 movies that are in the Winter Olympic Games, and suffice to say, one of them actually is not real. It's a fictional movie, so you have to figure that I picked out an Olympic movie that isn't real, and I'm going to go ahead and start with that. The number 5 movie for me is The Cutting Edge, and, well, suffice to say, this is a romance movie. It's a guilty pleasure movie, and if you listen to my top 5 or other podcast, Two Pals on the Pod, I had a top 5, block 5 with guilty pleasures with Mark T. Robinson, and I had that as my number 1 guilty pleasure movie of all time. But it's number 5 for me on this list. Basically, it's simple. A hockey player who recently got injured in a game is paired up with a stuck-up, snobbish female figure skater who both want to win the gold medal. For her, it's her last chance to experience a gold medal. For him, he wanted to win a gold medal after being denied the opportunity as a hockey player. And they both are working together as partners in the figure skating competition. And there are some early tensions going on. They just don't seem to get along and this and that. But over time, they start to have an appreciation for each other. And next thing you know, they're finding themselves getting more and more attracted to each other. And it culminates with a really great finish. I mean, look, it's your typical boy meets girl, girl can't stand boy, boy and girl work out their differences while trying not to hate each other or trying to avoid hating each other. They start getting closer and closer. They have some bumps in the road that prevent them from getting together, and there's jealousy, there's all that, this and that, and you're just going to have to watch the movie for yourself. Because some romance movies, they don't necessarily have happy endings, but I'm not going to spoil it for you. You might have a general idea and this and that, but I'm not going to go down that route and spoil the movie for you. So, my number 5 movie is The Cutting Edge. Definitely an interesting one. At number 4, The Boys in the Boat. Now, this was a movie that I saw in December. It actually came out in December. This was a movie that was based on the book, The Boys in a Boat, which is one of the best books I've definitely read. And it was written by Daniel James Brown, and it's based on the true story of the 1936 U.S. men's rowing team, who initially were college teammates at the University of Washington. They were competing in the 8-man crew, which is basically a boat race where you have 8 men rowing backwards from start to finish, and you have what they call a coxswain, which, they spell it Coxswain, but it's like the jockey. It's someone that is in charge of the boat, particularly in navigating it and steering it in a direction, and just a way to get the guys going. So it's a really interesting movie. This takes place during the Great Depression, and it combines 2 historical elements to it. One is, of course, the Great Depression and how these boys were struggling and living, in pretty poor conditions while trying to make an education, getting their college degrees at Washington during a pretty pivotal time in American history. And then the other, of course, is the up-and-coming rise of the Nazi regime, which would, nobody in America knew what the Nazi Party was all about. And obviously now when you think about it, it's not a party that nobody wants to have themselves be involved in at this stage. But nobody knew that at that time. So this is basically a story of an underdog story of how these boys would, from the University of Washington, are able to take down the best rowing teams, not only in the entire nation, but also from around the world. And this was their opportunity to go win a gold medal. I definitely would read the book first by Daniel James Brown, and then also check out the movie, which was directed by George Clooney. Now, I'm not going to promise you that it's the best sports movie out there, and I know that most of the comments have been a little bit mediocre, maybe a bit of a safe movie, but it's definitely an emotional and inspiring movie for me. Just, with the underdog rise from rags to riches, if you will. So I definitely am appreciative of seeing that movie as well. And, I definitely need to go see that movie again. It's definitely one that I should keep up with. Maybe I'll watch it before the Olympic Games come up soon. But coming in at number 3, some people say they cannot believe Jamaica, we got a bobsled team. Yes, Cool Runnings is my number 3 Olympic sports movie of all time. And did I say 2 winter sports movies on this list? I meant to say 3. I apologize for that. But yes, Cool Runnings, based on a true story of the 1988 Olympics, the first ever Jamaican bobsled team. Now, when you think of Jamaica, you probably think of them in summer sports, sprints and track and field and everything. But bobsledding, now that's a whole different matter. So you had these 4 guys, obviously from Jamaica. In this movie, one of the athletes wanted to win the gold medal. He tried to win in, the 100 meters and try to go to the Olympic Games, actually. He tried to go to the Olympic Games in the 100 meters, but came up short. And he gets a pretty unique opportunity to go to the Olympic Games. The only thing is, the sport that he chose and these athletes chose is a sport that is not really talked about in Jamaica, let alone even mentioned or seen before, because Jamaica is not known for icy snow mountains or any cool conditions for that matter. It's a tropical island. It's paradise, summer, it's like that all the time. Well, they choose the bobsled event. And if you don't know what bobsled is, basically you take this big machine and you glide it down this, like a water slide, only it's like an ice slide. I guess I call it that, but I don't think it is. But it's basically you follow this trail and you're trying to get through it, and you have to cross it in the fastest time, and the fastest time usually wins. And it's really, there's more to it, but it's about steering, it's about direction, and it's about coordination with these 4 guys that are riding in this machine, this bobsled, all the way from start to finish. But Yeah, so you have these 4 Jamaican athletes trying to make him to the Olympics in bobsled, which is unique. And John Candy, the late John Candy, in one of his final film roles before he unexpectedly passed away, was the coach who played the coach as well. Now, John Candy is known for being a comedian. He was known more for being the funny, big, fat, goofy guy. You know, I guess you would say he was the Canadian version of Chris Farley, although that might be stretching it out a little bit. But John was actually starting to try to change things up in his career. He wanted to do a little bit more dramatic, and there wasn't really any comedy moments with him in this movie. So you could start to see a little bit of that transition to being a little more of a dramatic actor. But he definitely was an outstanding man in this film. He plays a coach who years earlier got accused of causing some problems with the bobsled team, which unfortunately led to him being banished by Team USA. And, you know, it took him a long time to get over that. And when he finally did, he accepted responsibility and he made a mistake. But he was there to coach these guys for a chance to compete in the Winter Olympic Games. And certainly it's based on a true story. Some of the stuff didn't happen in real life, but they do it just for entertainment purposes. And it's a movie that I really think fans would definitely want to watch. It's a Disney movie, and if you're a 90s kid like me, you know what I'm talking about. But if you haven't heard about this before, go watch it. It's a funny movie. I mean, it's funny, but it has a very emotional ending to it. Number 2, Miracle. The greatest sports moment in the history of all time. The greatest sports moment in the history of all time. It's the United States men's hockey team of 1980, coached by Herb Brooks, who was denied the opportunity to go to the Olympic Games previously as a player. He gets an opportunity to coach these guys, and without question, he leads them to great success. This is an underdog ragtag team. This was also during the 1970s, which was a really difficult time in the United States. And, you know, this is one of those incredible sports stories without question. It's the Miracle on Ice upset of the United States men's hockey team pulling off the 4-3 victory over the Soviet Union, who was the best team in all of sports. In hockey, they just dominated everybody. And these were college kids going up against the big professionals. Now, the Soviet Union hockey team, they considered themselves amateurs, but let's be real. They beat up on some of the NHL's best players, and they really were so skilled and so talented. And for the Americans to have their miracle moment, of course, Al Michaels, the great broadcaster, is in this movie broadcasting the game. He broadcasts like he recreates the broadcast of that. He actually voices himself in normal time in this movie until the last 10 seconds, which, of course, is where they played off that iconic call. 5 seconds left to go in the game. Do you believe in miracles? Yes, and everything. I really want to play it for you right now, but I would be kind of spoiling the movie, even though I definitely think everybody knows exactly the story that I'm talking about. But, of course, Kurt Russell plays Herb Brooks. Kurt, I love the guy. He's a Disney legend. He has been in various Disney movies, and certainly this is one of the best roles for Kurt Russell in his career. And, you know, without question, a true inspirational moment. Man, I get goosebumps even watching the whole movie, even watching the game for that matter. I mean, it's just, it still gives you goosebumps when you think about it. But definitely a great movie to watch based on a true story. Now, as far as sports moments, it's number 1 all time for me, and I think for a lot of people. Some people might not have heard about it, but they might consider it if they understood the context as well. But we're talking about Olympic movies. And folks, I don't think there's any question as far as what number 1 is. It's the only Olympic sports movie to be the recipient of an Academy Award for Best Picture. And it's one of 3 sports movies to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. I'm talking, of course, about Chariots of Fire. And this is a story about the 1924 British track and field team, particularly 2 athletes, Harold Abrams and Eric Liddell. One is a Jewish man who faces discrimination based on his religion while he tries to make it on the team and be a successful track athlete. The other is a Christian man from Scotland who, runs but is more focused on his missionary. And there's a pivotal moment in the scene in the movie where he has to run in an event on Sunday, but he doesn't run on Sunday because of his religious beliefs, and he refuses to do so. And it's a real interesting climax to this movie. Now, funny thing that we talk about this because, as a matter of fact, it was 100 years ago when this movie, the story behind this movie takes place. Oh my gosh. Man, they're going to be hyping that up so big. But 1924, the Olympic Games were in Paris. And now, 100 years later, the Olympic Games are in Paris. Oh my gosh. I'm watching Chariots of Fire all the way. But wow, I just cannot believe it. I am so stupid sometimes. I just realized that it was 100 years, about to approach 100 years of the 1924 games. Man, I'll tell you what, incredible movie, definitely worth Best Picture. Now, I know some people might say, well, Raiders of the Lost Ark, that was a great movie. And listen, I love Raiders of the Lost Ark too, but come on now. For a movie that would ultimately be a trilogy, there's no way that it was going to win Best Picture, especially with a story like this. And even I don't know if you would count Raging Bull. Actually, I think Raging Bull was a year before. But, man, it's definitely a great movie. I love Chariots of Fire. Probably the only time I rooted against an American team in any competition for that matter. But, yeah, I think when you watch the movie and a great storyline, it's just so tremendous in that sense. So, to give you a recap, my top 5 Olympic movies of all time: The Cutting Edge, The Boys in a Boat, Cool Runnings, Miracle, and Chariots of Fire. And, without question, 5 of the best sports movies, in my opinion. You might have some different opinions as well, but please let me know what you guys feel in the comments. You can either disagree with me or you can agree with me. So, therefore, that is my top 5 list of Olympic movies as well. And folks, we're going to stick around, or actually we're going to come right back. I'll give out my final thoughts on the show. Stay tuned. Cool to close out the show, and I wanted to bring this up because I tell you what, if there's one thing that guys should know about me, I love Bluebell ice cream. Yes, I definitely love Bluebell ice cream, and I got nothing against Ben and Jerry's or any kind of flavors, but yeah, Bluebell is it for me. I mean, yes, I am a Texan, so we do treat Bluebell seriously like we do treat high school football and Whataburger and all that stuff, but Bluebell is actually having a tournament where they're going to be bringing back some old retired flavors for the upcoming 2025 year. And I am looking at all these flavors and I'm thinking to myself, man, I got to be honest, I really think I've seen these flavors around before this past year, and I didn't even know they were retired as well. But some of the flavors that Bluebell is thinking about bringing back are Creole cream cheese, triple chocolate, key lime pie, raspberry fudge brownie, cookie cake, mocha madness, blueberry cheesecake, cherry amaretto, cordial, strawberry cheesecake, red velvet, hot fudge brownie, lemon bliss, gingerbread house, triple caramel, and tiramisu. And I'm like, wow. I swear, some of these ice cream flavors have definitely been on here the last summer or last year, and I haven't even been paying attention. But man, Bluebell, you got to keep all these flavors going together. I mean, I understand some people might not like it, but man, give those that do a break, for crying out loud. But yes, they're going to be putting together a sporting tournament. It's going to resemble a sporting event, as the Creamery's website calls on people to vote in matchups that appear in the bracket with similar flavor profiles going up against each other. So, for example, you have the blueberry cheesecake going up against strawberry cheesecake, and the red velvet cake against groom's cake. So whoever wins both matchups based on fan votes will then go up against each other. And it just goes on, and it actually is supposed to start, it's actually starting it right now. So we can vote on Instagram, Facebook Stories, X, or Bluebell's website. And it ends June 28th at 4 p.m. So, hey, listen, guys, I need a huge favor from you. I want you guys to vote Red Velvet Cake, because I have never tried Red Velvet Cake before. Like, seriously, I really want you guys to vote for it. Please. I mean, because I feel like cookie cake, mocha madness, triple caramel, triple chocolate, that's hot fudge brownie. That's something that I swore I saw in stock every time I go to a Walmart or H-E-B, to get some ice cream whenever I feel like it. But my gosh, I'm serious, guys. Red Velvet Cake, please bring it back. I don't want to go out to Alpine, Texas to find Red Velvet Cake or so. I like that ice cream out there, but I don't want to go back out there every once or twice, every 2 years. Please vote for Red Velvet Cake. I'm campaigning right now. I demand you guys to vote Red Velvet Cake. And if you guys don't get Red Velvet Cake all the way to be brought back, I'm going to be really disappointed. And I'm just going to have to wait another couple years before Red Velvet Cake comes. Because, man, aside from vanilla, the Dr. Pepper float, the Reese's Pieces flavor, and maybe some other flavors I've thought about that I haven't tried it yet, or cinnamon, something like that, I love Red Velvet Cake. Seriously, please do me a favor and vote Red Velvet Cake. But you can do that. You can also subscribe to this podcast on Podbeam, Spotify, and also you can watch it on my YouTube channel, KWC Cline, Line 91, KWC Line 91. I got to make sure I get that right. But you can subscribe to my YouTube channel as well, and you can listen to there. And folks, thank you very much for listening, tuning in. What were your reactions on the Stanley Cup Finals? What's your all-time favorite Olympic sports movie, if you have one? And as always, I will see you guys next time. Next time, we should be in for a real special case of another episode of Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock. Have yourselves a great day, everybody.